This will be the final Mid-Atlantic weather winter outlook. I would say that I don't have a good snow map, so I will probably produce one later, but you get the sense from what I'm sharing what that will be. So let's just go forward through what I think is going to happen this winter. The contributing factors you're going to see are the snow advance index and where that ended up, the quasi-biennial oscillation, sea surface temperatures, INSO, the groundwater, and the solar cycle. The snow advance index was very impressive. I mean, we had an awesome advance. Snow is now covering a huge part of Eurasia, but it really did advance. It was really excited in the early part of October, kind of stalled a little bit, then caught right back up towards the end. So I think we're all good. So this does have a correlation to what is called the negative North Atlantic Oscillation. All this is a blocking pattern that can cause snowstorms along the East Coast because it blocks the cold air in place and doesn't allow low pressure systems to escape off the East Coast, but slows them down and allows them to kind of link up with northern stream energy. And that's the jet streams that are coming across that potentially could cause some good nor'easters. So there is a signal there that could help. Just because you have it, though, doesn't mean that you're going to have a negative NAO. And we've seen that in the last couple of years where the NAO hasn't really linked up with the snow advance index. This year, maybe it is doing that. One thing I'm not certain of, if you look at the picture there, sea ice extent has been very, very low this year. It's just really about to kind of take off and finally get kind of totally covered. I'm sure those crab harvesters and stuff have had a much longer season this year due to this. So anyway, just an interesting note. I don't know how much it's influenced, but I know it's partially influenced by the warmer oceans, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and sea. Definitely some warmer currents up there in the northern part of Alaska, the Bering Strait, and things like that. So anyway, we'll see what we do. So deadliest catch this year probably had quite a crop. So I did want to just caution that again. The correlation doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get a negative NAO. So what is a quasi-biennial, biannual oscillation? Honestly, I don't know much about it. I'm just going to be honest. You'd think by now I would have done a little more reading. What I do know is you're looking for something that has a pattern that is around slightly to moderate negative, about a negative 5, negative 15 as it settles in. Right now, signals look like they're going to be favorable. So I do like what I'm seeing as far as that goes. We'll have to see if that remains. And to me, it looks like the index should land between that plus 5 to negative 15 reading, which is kind of what we're looking for. Nothing bad showing up on this index at this point, but I'm not sure we know yet how it's going to ultimately pan out. As we look at the sea surface temperature anomalies, I think this is interesting. I feel like the sea surface temperatures are the best indicators for what's happening in weather patterns, and I continue to believe that, and I think it shows already because I liked what was happening near Alaska. There's a warm pool of water, which I will show you in just a moment, and that warm pool of water is still there, and I think it is favorable for what we call cross-polar flow, negative EPO, or negative a negative pattern basically for bringing cold air from over Siberia. And we had that link up, and we had some cold air spill in a little bit faster than I thought. I thought it would happen late November. It happened early, or much earlier in November. So we saw basically the bottom kind of fall out in the temperatures. The equatorial Pacific Ocean is interesting because you have the El Nino or La Nina area, El Nino being the warmer than normal body of water, and La Nina being the colder than normal. And honestly, we see some favoring towards a little bit warmer than normal here. Does that mean that we'll get El Nino? I don't know. But what it does mean is that there could be more moisture and more energy in the southern jet stream, which, when coupled with the northern cold and the southern, jet with the moisture, could produce some pretty prolific, that's really strong, but let's say more moisture is available for some storminess. And then we have what's happening off Newfoundland. There is some separation out in the cold water from the northern part where it's above normal and southern part that's below this above normal. There's this little chunk in there of cold air water. I'll show it to you in just a moment. That could favor maybe more NAO being negative. We'll have to see. I'm not saying there's perfect correlation, nor is it the perfect location. I think the location shows more of what I would call an eastern block than a western block. An eastern blocks are not going to give It's the best favorable setup for coastal storms. But in general, we can see that. And then we look off the East Coast. There's still warm water off there. And honestly, I mean, look at the storm that's blown up off the southeast coast. It's very, very strong. Almost a hybrid kind of tropical system because it's got a lot of moisture within it. It's very energized. Fortunately, what looks like all the winds are going to come on shore be on the coast. It's a little further out. It's still causing a lot of beach erosion and beach flooding, coastal flooding. So a lot of concerns out in that way. But honestly, it hasn't been quite as windy as it looked like it would be at one point. So here we go. Here's what it looks like. Sorry, let me get back to it. We've got that warm body of water, as I mentioned, off the what kind of people call the blob. And it is associated somewhat to some of the INSO patterns and things like that. But in general, it's been much above normal. You can even see it up in the Bering Sea that it's much above normal. That's why the ice extent hasn't been up there. I think this is big responsible for the western ridging or a high pressure system that's off the west. When you get ridging out in the west, you get much colder temperatures in the east. And now it's tucked up pretty close to the coast. I think the blob has to be right up against the coast to be its most effective. But honestly, this is very, very favorable. We also have the equatorial Pacific, as I mentioned, with INSO or the El Nino kind of index there. It definitely looks warmer. There was much more colder water in there in earlier display, and now we're seeing kind of an increase in that. We have that separation there, that cooler air water off of Newfoundland. It's a little more pronounced at this point than it was before. It's still not most ideal. Like I said, it's kind of further east than west, but that degree of separation does cause some tendency towards blocking, just from what I understand. Probably not perfect yet, but I like what I see there. It's a little better than what it was. And then we have that warm water off the East Coast. It has been there. It's been there anomalously high. And so when storm systems do come to the coast, they're going to get more energized. That means more precipitation, so we get bigger precip events. So that's all good. So here's the El Nino, like I said. Since the last post, we've seen it get a little bit stronger. Not sure it's going to be a full El Nino. I don't think anything is forecast there. I see one model really go to the +1. You see other ones kind of approach +1, but don't get there. But in general, I don't think it's going to get quite that warm. But this could and should favor better southern stream systems, which of course we need southern energy to link up with northern energy and coldness to produce our snow. And I think we've already seen this in some of the storms. Some of the storms that have come through have been very, very strong. I mean, look around Halloween, that thing was insane. But we also had another event earlier that helped with the rain situation and helped the drought, some of the drought busting that we needed. So all good indicators for storms, and even more precipitation than what was forecasted in some of those storms. Now we hit another dry period here. I think we've got to see how things pan out, but I think they'll come around more wet, especially over the next 7 to 14 days. So, I mean, this is an update on the groundwater. The drought pretty much got erased. There are still some pockets of drier than normal areas. I originally was cautioning. Sorry, let me go back. Cautioning about northwestern Virginia, southwestern Pennsylvania, west central Maryland has a dry area, and it's kind of in that DC hole area where you get southern stream systems. They go off the East Coast and don't really come far enough north to give us precipitation. You get northern stream energy from northern jet streams that kind of go too far to the north to give us a lot of moisture and stuff. But the middle ground, which is us here in where I live, in the northwestern part of Virginia, and that west central Maryland and southwest Pennsylvania, kind of gets skipped. And that seems to have happened quite a few times here. We'll have to see if this trend continues. I don't like it, because that's where I live, but it could mean that maybe there's not quite as much snow in that one area than other areas. Now that's if the pattern holds. In general, though, we haven't been totally left out precipitation. When we've had the bigger events, it's rained plenty here. It's just in these smaller events that they tend to seem to miss us. We'll see if that holds. I'm just mentioning it because it's a little bit interesting. And of course, I have to worry about my backyard because I want snow and I'm a snow lover. But anyway, you see in general, the top shows the drought monitor showing the drought's pretty much going to be removed from any of the areas in the Mid-Atlantic. The bottom shows the improvements in those areas the last couple of months. Our last month, you see that we've gone much, much better, much wetter. Everything's much different. And again, that's the kind of pattern you want, because you want to see more moisture, more rain, or precipitation in areas that can meet up with the cold for our good old snowstorms, if you like snow like me. So when I say good news, of course, I'm speaking favorably in the snow realm. The grand solar minimum is there, and I wouldn't say it's grand solar, but the solar minimum. It just means that there is less sunspots and solar activity. Previously, this has resulted in many ice ages or colder periods in our history. And so I do think this plays into the overall patterns. We'll have to see how it really works. And there is that pattern again I mentioned because of where we are. I still think this has a lot to play. Some of the people out there in the weather world are a little more robust on this, saying maybe we're headed for a cooler period, or maybe even another little like mini ice age. I don't think we'll get to ice age, but cooler than normal to kind of offset the theories of global warming. But we will go down that road. I'm not going to jump into that topic. But I will say that it does tend to have a play on colder than normal conditions. So I'd say in general, the conclusion is all things look favorable still for a way above normal snowfall this year. I would say that areas west of the 95 corridor, now all the way down in North Carolina, really could see a really good year for snow if you like snow. I mean, it just looks that favorable. So at least 100 to 125%, or 125 to 150%. So the warmth of the sea in Alaska, I think, is still going to continue to be there. And it's, I think, like I said, already caused that colder than normal a little bit faster. You saw my conclusion before is that we would see the temperatures plunge in November, possibly. I thought towards the end of the month, but it came a lot sooner than I expected. December will definitely have the tendency, I think, to get back into a colder pattern, and thus a chance of some light or even moderate snowstorms. If we get some snowstorms in December, definitely going to help that average for the year, because most of our snow comes in January, and I think January, by late December and into January, we may hit a really cold spell, and it's going to be a pretty good winter. We tend to have a thaw in the middle part of January, and I don't think that won't be. I mean, that will definitely happen at some point. And even in December, I would not be surprised for a warmer spell in the middle of it. Especially you have some of the El Nino impacts that definitely would cause a warming trend at some point. That doesn't mean we're over. It just means that there are things that are happening in the atmosphere, and it has to shuffle around some, so don't be surprised. But I think it's going to tend towards colder than normal. And then we look into January the same way. When I think it's cold, especially towards late January, we stay there. In February, may be brutally cold. We may have a period where it's extremely cold here. And that could mean good chances of snow. But as I even mentioned here, if we get brutally cold in the mid-Atlantic, it tends to shift the storm tracks a little further south. But as the cold kind of re-intensifies or lessens, at those points where it's intensifying or lessening or back and forth, tends to be when good storms pop. So climatologically speaking, late January, early February, primary times for our good snowstorms. And I do think that March is going to still come into play. With November being involved in the cold all the way until March, this is what I would consider one of the more extreme winter setups. So that is my outlook. And so I posted this before. I don't think this is wrong, except for I may extend this 125 to 150% of normal all the way down into the southwestern parts, into the mountains, all the way into Southwest Virginia. I just don't see how we're going to get away from having a way above normal area of snow with 125 to 150% of normal. So I just need to update this map, and I'm sorry I didn't. And then, of course, 100 to 125%. I'm going to favor 125% for a larger part of the area. Excuse me. Hey, colds. Anyway, so that is my outlook, and just thought I would share an update. I think everything still points towards what we're looking for, and the cold came a little sooner than I thought.